This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio and to the Tuesday Late Late Show hosted by me, Emily Edwards. This week we're going to get into the theme of Valentine's Day and talk about relationships and education with my partner, Andrew Rushton.
Hi.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. As I said, my name is Emily Edwards. For any recurring listeners, welcome back. It's good to chat to you again. And if this is your first time with me, here's a bit about my background in education. I'm currently teaching secondary history as a full-time classroom teacher. I started my NQT year back when it was called an NQT in 2017, and I have an NPQML as well as experiences in middle leadership, both in temporary positions as a pastoral deputy head of sixth form and curriculum lead for history, though thankfully not at the same time. I also have experience in teaching Key Stage 3 to 5 for history and Key Stage 5 A-level politics. And tonight, for the first time in my show, I have a very, very special guest tonight. As we're talking about relationships, I thought it'd be very appropriate to have someone who has experienced dating someone in the teaching world, and that is my boyfriend, Andrew.
Hello there, I am Andrew. I am 29 years old. I don't know why I said that, but so I have been dating Emily for just over 18 months. First met in June 22, I think it was.
Sounds about right.
And then made official July 22, and then we moved in together August last year. I am not a teacher, so I'm coming to this from a completely blind perspective. The only perspective I have is of a student and as a guardian. So that is where I'm coming from in this one. So pass you back to Emily.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so with the introductions having been made, tonight, as I say, we're going to discuss relationships and take the theme of Valentine's Day as our kind of focus for this week. If you do have any questions for us or any contributions to the discussion, please feel free to add that into the chat as we go. We'd love to hear from you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing EtonX from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the EtonX curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The mother of murdered schoolgirl Brianna Ghey has spoken about the need for positive change and a lasting legacy for her daughter. Mrs. Ghey visited Westminster as part of her campaign for mindfulness to be taught in all schools in England. She commented on her Peace and Mind UK Facebook page that her focus would be to improve lives by empowering people, giving them the tools to build mental resilience, empathy, and self-compassion through mindfulness. She went on to say that she hoped to create more understanding for everyone. Mrs. Jai has already raised thousands of pounds to deliver mindfulness training in schools in her local area. The Department for Education has said there were no plans to introduce mindfulness, but the RSHE curriculum included a strong focus on mental health, and that all schools had been offered grants to train a senior mental health lead by 2025. Mrs. Jai has also spoken about the idea for a phone for under 16s to limit access to social media apps. The Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza, told the BBC that she supported the ideas and said more could be done to promote phones that are safe by design. She described Mrs. Jai's vision as really smart, but questioned whether the likes of Google and Apple would create phones with access that is safe by design. PM Rishi Sunak has stated that the new Online Safety Act is robust, but parents told the BBC how difficult it is to take away a smartphone from a child who already has one, whilst others described the pressure from social media as relentless. In Wales, the cap on university tuition fees is rising from £9,000 to £9,250 a year from September. Education Minister Jeremy Miles says he recognises students will be disappointed. A report on the BBC News website says loans will also go up to cover the 2.8% increase, which will affect undergraduate students studying in Wales whose home address is in Wales. Those with a home address in Wales but who study in other parts of the UK are unaffected because they already pay the £9,250 for their studies. Mr. Miles blamed sustained inflationary pressure on higher education providers in Wales and that the increase was unavoidable, but would help to safeguard provision and investment. The Guardian reported on school finances with an article on findings that almost half of multi-academy trusts in England were in deficit last year. The report by the accountancy network Creston UK was based on studying the accounts of 279 trusts, representing over 2,300 schools. It found 47% were running in-year deficits. Rising energy bills and staffing costs were blamed by many and made worse by uncertainty around income streams. School leaders say that schools are constantly asked to do more with less. Last October, the Department for Education in England admitted to making a £370 million error, meaning mainstream primary and secondary schools will be given at least £50 less for each pupil than original forecasting predicted. This forced school leaders to redraw their budgets for 2024 to 25. With energy costs still high and a recruitment and retention crisis leading to an increased use of agency staff, mean that many school leaders are facing further pressure on budgets and many expect a deficit trend to continue. More than 100 school buildings containing dangerous concrete will be rebuilt or refurbished, according to a report on the BBC. The government says all affected schools will receive funding to permanently remove the dangerous concrete known as RAC. Unions say the announcement includes no new money. The 234 schools affected in England have reportedly returned to face-to-face learning, but many children are still being taught in marquees, portable classrooms, or in other off-site locations. Some pupils have not been able to access specialist classrooms for design and technology, as well as science labs and other specialist spaces. The government has been criticised for not making changes to exams for those affected. Finally, a jury in the United States of America has held the mother of a 15-year-old mass shooter criminally responsible for the death of 4 high school students in 2021. The 15-year-old himself was sentenced to life without parole in December, but at the start of February the male's mother was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, the first time a parent has been convicted of such charges due to their child's role in a mass shooting. The case has raised questions about the accountability of parents. Although the youth's parents had gifted him the weapon days before the attack. Prosecutors also argued that parents had not paid enough attention to their son's declining mental health. US law generally only holds individuals responsible for their own actions, but this case appears to present some change. The schools where the shooting took place has also faced criticism for not acting swiftly when drawings of guns were found on the mail earlier in the day of the shooting. Whatever the outcome of the sentencing, the case appears to be reinvigorating debate around the issue of parental responsibility, alongside individual culpability. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Right then, so jumping into tonight's show, I think before we get into many of the questions, I thought it might be a good idea to explain to any of the listeners at home why we decided to do this. Because it is a bit unusual, I think, for this show to have guests coming on, and especially guests kind of outside of the educational sphere, as it were, the bubble. And it kind of came out of an impromptu discussion we had. I know we talk about the show, talk about different topics I've got kind of in the pipeline. And I know it's probably a bit awkward having to listen into me kind of talking to the computer for an hour on a Tuesday every fortnight. But it was something I think that we discussed. We talked about our kind of preconceptions coming into it. And obviously you coming in completely outside of the teacher world is something that we actually thought not only could we talk a lot about, but also something that genuinely we thought might help other people at home, might help to kind of bridge the divide between kind of the teaching bubble and kind of the rest of the world in a sense. And I think as well, Valentine's Day just really provides a perfect opportunity to kind of add that nice thematic element in it. I mean, I don't know, did you kind of feel the same about it, or?
Yeah, it's like you say, we've discussed it lots of times. You've talked about, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? And particularly with the what was it when you were doing the non-fiction and fiction?
Yeah.
So I was sort of throwing out ideas and that sort of thing. I thought, oh, why don't we sort of have a joint session, a joint show, and just sort of, and obviously it being Valentine's Day, it made, like you say, made sense. It made, why don't we just talk about our relationship and air our dirty laundry on the internet? So
what could possibly go wrong?
Exactly.
So in essence, I think how we're going to make this work is have a bit of a back and forth, some questions you've got for me, some questions I've got for you, and trying to not kind of narrate our relationship, because I think nobody really wants to listen to an hour of that, but kind of go through the key kind of challenges, the key events that led to kind of these bigger discussions that I think lots of people, either who are planning to enter kind of relationships, or people who are in relationships and kind of early navigating them, or people who've been in relationships for kind of eons and think, you know what, it should be a bit of a laugh to hear other people going through it after they've gone through it many years themselves. So that's the plan, and we'll jump into it shortly.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Right then, so I think the first best question probably to ask, and the one I'm probably the most curious about is to do with initial impressions. So in the very early stages, when I kind of say drop the bombshell as if it's some, massive news, but when I told you I was a teacher as my day-to-day job, what were your first impressions?
Well, so like I said earlier, I'm coming to this as the only experience I've had of teaching is when I was a student at school, or when I've done parents' evening for my nephew or something like that. So this is like a complete new world. Some might say a whole new world. To quote a famous film. So I'm coming to this completely blind. So there are obviously a few sort of conceptions that you have. I think one of the big ones was that it's just, she's a teacher. She works 9 till 3, or maybe 9 till 4 at a push. She's going after school club. That was probably one of the big ones, and that was I've never not thought that, or should I say I've never sort of really thought beyond that. Do you know what I mean? Another one was holidays, like do it for the holidays.
So what, 12, 13 weeks, something like that?
It's glorious, isn't it? It's glorious. It's just, it is a wonderful amount of holidays, but obviously I've found out since that it doesn't necessarily equate to that much.
Yeah, you've learned better now.
Yeah. I think another one is that you sort of when you to pull the curtain back a little bit, we met on a dating site. So when you're on a dating site and you talk to other teachers, all the female teachers seem to be primary school teachers.
Hey, here we go.
So I think that was a sort of preconception I had as well, just like probably from experience, like in that sense, but also from a thought of just my own bias, thinking, why on earth would you want to go and teach teenagers at high school? Because no, not for me.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something I've come across a lot. Not just when obviously talking to you about my job, but generally when people ask, "Oh, what do you do?" and you say teaching, it immediately is, "Oh, how do you find primary school?" Or, "Oh, it's lovely that you're going into primary school," and it's always then the no secondary kind of extra reveal, and the reactions always look either horror as the why, like you say, why would you teach teenagers, or just I think a little bit of confusion, more so around, because I'm, for the record, I'm like 5'7" and not particularly imposing, I don't think from an immediate glance. So I think there is a sense of, for blokes who are potentially looking a bit more imposing, a bit more kind of not necessarily authoritarian, but they are kind of look a bit more like authority figures, or they'll be able to potentially intimidate. And I think that comes from a very traditional view of teachers there to, lead the room, take charge, a very old school traditional form of behavior management of the kids respect you out of fear rather than genuine respect.
On that point then, do you think that it's the same sort of reversed? So do you look at a man and think he must be a high school teacher? Is there that sort of preconception? Because I've never really thought about it realistically. But
I mean, there was the rumours going around. I say rumours. It was the stereotypes going around when we did like training and things like that. Predominantly seeing women in primary school programs. Young men were, in essence, seen as kind of gold dust in the primary school setting. But at the same time, the advice obviously given to us was slightly different. So I think for women in secondary, I know we had a lot more about behavior management. You've got to be really hot on it. You've got to, be really clear and obvious, because you might have to deal with, young lads, and depending on the area, you don't know what background some of these kids are coming from. If they're coming from backgrounds where women are seen in a more secondary or submissive role, that might be how they perceive you, and you're having to navigate that whilst trying to do your actual job of teaching. In the same way for men, that idea of, are you going to get parents who get a bit funny, the idea that a young man or a man generally is working with young children. And again, those stereotypes, that kind of sexism around men not being kind of caregivers in that sense, I think they had very different advice as well, that we wouldn't obviously have received if I was a woman going into primary or a bloke going into secondary. I think the advice you get generally is different. I think for us within obviously that job, I don't think we came with those preconceptions, but we know they're out there. It's one of those things.
Is it potentially based in fact that in terms of like raw data, in terms of like numbers, like is it more men going to high school whereas more women going to primary? Is that a thing? Not to sort of drag the point a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there are the figures out there. I think there is, obviously with the biggest figures at the moment, I think the ones leaving the profession are the bigger concern than the ones going in. But I think that is something to consider, that maybe kind of those societal stereotypes are affecting the teachers going into the profession, and kind of skewing the data and therefore kind of perpetuating it unintentionally, versus, again, you know, the attitude. I knew people who I was training with who joined specifically to go into primary. I knew people, I mean, like myself, other women who were, you know, dead set on secondary. I mean, I was training with a woman who, there were a couple of women who wanted to go into PRUs, pupil referral units, for the kind of outside the teacher sphere at home. And those are highly difficult scenarios for, I mean, even experienced teachers. They do require obviously very specialized, very skilled people to join them as teachers. And again, the idea of two women going into work at a PRU, it was seen as, why would you do that? But then again, I think, like you say, it's interesting to have these discussions, because otherwise I think you can live in your own little bubble a bit and forget that, you know, whilst it may be annoying to be asked every single time, oh, secondary or primary, I think there is still that societal expectation that women, caregiver, more feminine stereotypes about, you know, you'd want to work with younger children, whereas, you know, blokes, a bit more aggressive, a bit more intimidating, or they can handle the tougher secondary school. And I don't think it's the same, because if you put me in a primary school, I'd be completely lost. In the same time, if you had a man working in a primary and you threw him into a secondary, he might be equally as lost. I think it's two very different specialisms, and it's more about age of obviously the students rather than the kind of gender of the teacher. But it's an interesting discussion. It is something I think that has come up, and I know when we did a Twitter poll throughout last week or so, kind of asking people at home, other teachers, what their stereotypes were and what we thought might be the biggest stereotypes. And from the results, we had 178 votes, which is absolutely incredible. It's a lovely level of engagement to see. And really thank you to everyone who did vote. And we had 72% of voters, so out and out winner, being that the biggest misconception around teachers or teaching was that they only worked like 9 till 3. And I know that's something you brought up as one of your kind of early misconceptions. Like, what makes you think about that as an idea? What makes you believe that it's the 9 till 3?
I suppose you don't really know what is involved in teaching. Do you know what I mean? So you just see it as sort of like so I'm doing my job, I do say 9 till 5. So I'll just work through 9 till 5, and that's the time that my job is doing. And that obviously with teaching it's different. You have to prepare before you start. Like you've told me this before, you have to prepare before you actually can even begin to start. So it's a sort of, I think it's just a knowledge, not really knowing what's going on in the teacher's day. I think that's probably the sort of where that sort of comes from, not just because everyone else just like, if I start work at 9, that's when I start getting, contractually I start work at 9 and I finish at 12, that's when I work. So I think it's probably just that. Yeah, and
I think that is interesting because a lot of our work in the teaching world does go unseen. I know the kids don't see it. You know, they probably think these kind of worksheets, these revision sessions, like the textbooks and everything and the PowerPoints, kind of come out of nowhere. I've said to students before, my working hours, when they ask me, have you marked our assessments yet? And it's been, we did them the day before, period 3, and it is period 1 the next day, and you go, pop it. I work 7:30 till about 4:30. In the nicest way, I don't have time to also throw in your assessments in a 24-hour mark back period. But I think, again, it's because they just don't see the extra work we already do. It's just, well, you come in to do your teaching, you do your teaching, and then I guess you go, unless there's a parents' evening or a revision class or kind of a meeting. And so I think, like you say, there's a lot of prep that needs to be done behind closed doors, but unseen at home, or you get in early, you leave late attitude. And that's not really fully paid in any kind of contractual sense. Like, we do the work beforehand to then clock in and be able to then do our jobs. And I think that is something not unique to teaching, but it is one of those more unique aspects to different jobs generally. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that as part of our actual hours.
Well, I think it is quite unique to teaching in the sense that, like, say, for example, I work in the law. So a solicitor, if they were drafting a document for a client, they would, as soon as they start drafting it, they start recording their time. And whenever they finish, they stop the recording of that time.
Yeah.
And then that's then billed to the client. Do you know what I mean? So like, even preparing drafts of documents and that sort of thing is part of the job, part of the day job. Like, part of, you're expected to do that in your working hours. And I know a lot of solicitors don't just work 9 to 5. But that's a thing for another day. Probably not on a teacher's thing, actually. But it's like the preparation and like, it's all part of your working day. So what you actually get paid for, whereas you say, teachers are sort of, they have to do all this stuff before they can even begin their working day. So it's like a extracurricular sort of activities.
Yeah, and I think with those stereotypes, I think that's why it really gets under teachers' skins. So I know when I checked Twitter today, just to kind of doom scroll a little bit, it's my holiday after all, there was an element of looking at different tweets, and there was one that I saw that coincidentally could not have been timed better. It was earlier today that said, why do people get things wrong about teaching? The biggest thing I hear is, you guys only work weekdays from 8 till 3 with holidays and summers off, such an easy job. And I think it's so frustrating because it completely undermines all those extra hours that we put in, and builds into that idea of, we do this for the kids, we do this to get, these children having the best outcomes and, best opportunities available for them within the classroom and outside of the classroom going forward with their lives. And so to be told that you have it easy, you've been doing nothing, and that, in the reality being, if we didn't do that, not only would it be noticed, it would be, condemned as, how could you not prepare your lessons? How could you not provide extra opportunities? Why aren't you doing trips or extra classes or drop-in sessions or anything like that? And I think it does come down to that misconception around what the job actually is. I feel other people with different professions, they're able to explain what they do and have a more kind of wider social understanding. A solicitor is, okay, they've got, trials to prepare for, they've got, documents to fill in, working with clients, winning cases in essence. There's an idea of what a solicitor does. Doctors, they talk to patients, they have to fill out paperwork, they have to, dispense medication, but, write up different slips for medication. They have to potentially, if they are operating in kind of a surgical role, or if they are, doing any kind of checkups and things, they'll have that as their job. And I think there's a better understanding of where the time goes. Whereas with teaching, it's, we only know it from, like you say, I was a kid in school once. You only see them from 9 till 3 or 8:30 till 3:30. And it's, well, what else do they do? Which I think if people knew where the time went, there may be less of that misconception.
Yeah, I think that sort of lack of not lack of clarity, but lack of vision of what is actually going on behind the scenes is sort of where that sort of lies. And not to sound like a sycophant or anything, but it's such a crucial job that teachers do. Preparing, the next generation of, political leaders and scientists and all that sort of good stuff. And they are an easy target because they have such nice holidays and things like that. Do you know what I mean? Like you're an easy target because it from the outside it just looks like it's like that. Yes, but if it was sort of more widely sort of acknowledged and known that, your work day is never 9 till 3. Your work day is often 7 till 5, and that's on a good day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if that was more widely known, then people think, well, actually, maybe, yeah.
Well, I think we had a glimpse of that with COVID when people were having to, corral their children in front of a screen, keep them engaged, help support them whilst they're trying to do their own jobs. They're trying to, navigate a pandemic that none of us obviously were fully prepared for in any sense. So I think that's where we kind of saw that, what we call the social contract in essence, like the parental school engagement, kind of that relationship really improve briefly for that moment of, oh, we're starting to understand, like we have 1 or 2 or 3 kids that we are trying to help get their education, and we're finding it difficult to keep them focused, keep them engaged, to help support them as best we can. Obviously, what would that be like with 30 kids in a room? And I think that's like you say, the misconceptions are purely from people's own experiences. And generally looking at the other kind of stereotypes I put in the Twitter poll, I tried to think of things that I'd heard throughout my career. So obviously, like the only women do primary stereotype, which I know we've kind of covered a bit, so I will leave that as is. Only in it for the holidays was the next biggest one. It's 17% of people said that was the biggest misconception.
They are lovely holidays.
They are lovely. No, that's the thing. And I don't think there's any shame in teachers saying, yeah, we get fantastic holidays. And then obviously the flip side is, because teaching itself is a very intensive job, it's not necessarily like physically intensive. And you hope it's never physically intensive. If you're, lifting heavy weights or, doing anything that is intense, then that is
children.
Yeah, just a bit of a problem, really. But ultimately, it is a very mentally taxing job. You've got to make so many decisions. You are balancing the emotions and personalities of, as I say, potentially, 30 different students in a room. I've had classes of 32. I've managed to navigate that down this year down to, 31. I mean, ooh, crazy. But, A-level classes as well, even though they're smaller, obviously you have to have a high level of understanding and kind of prep for that, because it's obviously a high level of education. You've got potentially going from year 7s to year 13s, or, if you're working with primary school, you've got groups of, 7-year-olds who potentially are different developmental stages. And that is very mentally taxing, as well as trying to also do your job of imparting knowledge, making sure they understand. Things can happen. And I've known, on the playground, a kid comes in, floods of tears, and you're trying to go, right, how do I make sure they're okay? And if they need any help, whilst also settling in, say being kind, 26 of the kids in the room, making sure they're getting on with it. And, Timmy's trying to chat to his mate about what's happened at break time. So-and-so's trying to, flirt with a lad who's, she's desperately trying to get the attention of. There are 10 kids in there who are desperately trying to, get the best grade possible in an exam coming up. And it's balancing everything does make it so that by the end of those, on average, 6 to 7 weeks of just intense work, I think by the end of it, the holiday does feel like a very welcome refresher. And I know that, you've seen that a lot of teachers, including myself, the holidays aren't sacrosanct. I know for many people, they have the right mentality of, it's my holiday, I'm not doing any work, I will deal with it when it comes, back to it in a week or 2 weeks' time. But I think for many teachers, there is that sense of, well, you've got this free time to get this done. realistic, you should be able to get this done. So why aren't you doing that extra little bit to make that next lesson, that next class, whatever, better than it is currently? So that could be marking, it could be adding, new lessons, tweaking old lessons, sorting out booklets, things like that. And so even then, the holidays aren't completely left alone. It is very much working in the holidays. It's just how I frame it, of working from home rather than working in a classroom.
So on the topic of holidays,
Yeah.
It's actually quite, so the way you sort of describe it is like it's really good for your sort of mental health to sort of stop the burnout before it sort of happens.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that could be sort of, for me, where I can just book any day, any week off within reason. It is something that you could sort of look at, like teaching as an example. So that, look, these guys got 6-7 weeks of full concentration, doing full-time hours, and then you have a week off, or you have a few days off just to refresh, and then go again. So that could be a sort of good example for just generally. But on the sort of flip side, but not even the flip side, just on another
Tangent?
On a tangent,
Yeah.
on an aside, it always felt to me like the 6 weeks holidays were just, whilst I enjoyed not being at school, it just felt a bit long-winded, a bit sort of it dragged a little bit.
Done by week 4.
Yeah. So I feel like, I think a month is perfect. Like in terms of children, month is perfect. You've got 2 extra weeks to play with. You can stick that on Christmas. Everyone wants an extra week off at Christmas.
Yeah.
Stick that in wherever you've just got a single week off, and then it sort of balances it out. It feels like you get a proper break then, because obviously, like you say, you have to work, booking holidays, booking weddings, booking funerals, booking all that sort of stuff around these sort of periods, set periods, and obviously wax the price up, and all that sort of stuff. So is there a way that you'd sort of, is that a way you'd go with the holidays? Or if so, you were in charge of the holidays,
What would I do with them?
how would you do it?
Yeah, I think the problem is people, unfortunately, cannot all have the same idea. So I know what would benefit me. Obviously, at the moment, we don't have kids, we don't have other dependents. Having that extra time more flexibly, say Christmas, when we are seeing, family and friends, or for me, say like the October half term, because that winter term, that autumn term is long, to say the least, usually like 7 weeks and 8 weeks, or 2 8 weeks, or anything like that. And that might be a nicer way to break it up. I think what I might prefer is potentially having more kind of what we call like PD days, or like teacher training days, where having that time to maybe flexibly put throughout the year might be a little bit better. So I know when obviously last year we had like the King's coronation, and obviously the Queen's funeral, and May Day and things like that.
I barely worked in May.
But that's the thing. It was, every day suddenly became a 4-day work week. And whilst obviously those circumstances were very unique, having the idea of, you've got a Monday off here, a Friday off there, and knowing that certain terms you'd only have, 3, I mean, in May, I think it was only like 1 or 2 full weeks actually teaching. I think that did wonders for everybody. I know I was raving then about the 4-day work week. But again, I think having more flexibility, I know we've talked about wanting a bit more flexibility in the world of teaching to match other professions, having that flexi time. I know that you have the ability to work longer Monday through Thursday, and then have Friday afternoons off. And those extra hours placed throughout the week actually has done wonders for having that flexible 2.5, nearly a full Friday off in essence. I think that's been something that has opened my eyes to, well, how can we make teaching that desirable and flexible, especially for those with, say, like children who, rather than having to go part-time and take an unpaid extra day, how can we support them, within the classroom? And primary school teachers as well, the fact that they don't have kind of the same built-in kind of PPA is secondary. I know our kind of free time, I say the planning time, it's rarely ever free. It doesn't quite match up in the same. So having that flexibility for different schools to use those days that work best for the staff, I think could do wonders for kind of staff wellbeing, and also to make teaching, again, just more desirable as a job. We're talking about teacher retention, and I know what we've talked about in the relationship, and the challenges that we'll talk about in a bit that we've overcome sounds a bit very dramatic. But it is a great way for us to try and deal with those issues for teachers generally, rather than just in our kind of our little world. So with that segue, thank you for giving me the thumbs up there. I do appreciate it. In terms of the challenges we had in our early years, what do you think were some of the biggest as we were kind of starting off?
So in terms of dating, or in terms of early relationship, or both?
Bit of both.
Okay. Well, the big one for me was you not being available. I suppose I got used to a certain level of sort of communication, and there's a certain expectation that, like, in relationships, etc., that I would want a certain level of communication between me and a partner, and even like a prospective partner. But obviously, with your job, you would, like I mentioned earlier, you'd be working 7 till 5 probably, so I wouldn't hear from you then, and then you'd go home and you'd cook, and then you'd eat, then you'd chill out for a bit, and then that could be like, you know, the whole day I wouldn't hear from you, sort of thing, and it would be like, oh, does she like
she's
me?
still interested,
Like,
yeah.
what's going on? That probably comes from an insecurity on my behalf, but that's not for this radio show. But
I think that's pretty fair, though, to be fair, 'cause I know, obviously, with my phone, whilst we don't have an official policy at our school of turning our phones off during the day, I'm well aware, like, I put on kind of novelty ringtones. So having like Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins start playing as I'm trying to teach, you know, the horrors of World War II to year 8 probably isn't kind of the apt kind of interruption. And also I feel like it's just nice to model I don't need my phone during the day, neither do you. We're both here for the same reason. Let's get on with it. But I know what you mean, especially when we were just chatting, and then obviously when we became kind of official, it was something that I consciously kind of worked on. I know we'd had a conversation about it, that obviously you would be able to have your phone out on your desk as you're working and kind of check it as you go, as you're in between jobs. But obviously for me, it was, well, I get into work, I'm there early. I don't want to waste the fact that I've had to get up early to then spend it on my phone and not get those jobs done. But then at the same time, you know, we have about 40 minutes for lunch, 35, 40 minutes. So it is that sense of trying to find that time to prioritize the relationship over the job. And obviously being single before that for a little while, there was a sense of, well, I jumped into work more so than anything else, and getting back into probably healthier habits of talking to you, communicating a bit more. And I know it's been a lot easier since obviously we've moved in together, that, you know, we're not relying on the text messages to communicate. We can just check in with each other in person. But yeah, I think that idea of availability, especially for teachers, is potentially much more difficult. I know I'm not really a phone person much anyway, quite old school. But again, I think having that communication early on is so important, especially if someone's outside of teaching and not knowing the hours. It can probably seem a bit antisocial.
100%. I think like all the issues that we've had, like issues, I'm saying that in inverted commas, have been sort of addressed by talking it through, having honest conversations. So if that's any advice that we can impart on anyone else this evening, have honest conversations with your partner about the way you feel, about your expectations, and that sort of thing, because that's the only way it's ever going to work out.
Yeah, and I think
I should have left that till the end, shouldn't I? You could have wrapped it up with that one.
I mean, if we've got to leave it on anything, then we'll come back to it, absolutely.
But yeah, so I get the sense that teaching, there's a I know you've sort of talked to me about this before. There's a sort of tendency to feel like martyring yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
So like if I don't work these silly hours to get these jobs done, then the kids are going to suffer, and then I'm going to be to blame if this kid doesn't quite get the result, and then it's going to look bad for me, and all this sort of stuff. And I think it's really important to sort of break that mindset. I think it's really important to sort of like say, look, I am a teacher, and I'm proud of being a teacher because it's a wonderful profession. Easy for me to say. I'm struggling. But I'm not only a teacher.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I am still the same person. I am the person outside of my job. I still have, I have other relationships. I have hobbies. I have things I like to do. You know, that sort of thing. And it's really important to not push yourself down that sort of rabbit hole, saying like, look, I need a separation from the job and from life. And I think that sort of moves into the next point. There's that
kind of balancing work.
Yes, that's the one.
Expectations.
Balancing work life.
Yeah, and I think that is something that kind of being honest with myself. The idea of martyring yourself is very tempting, and I know we all say no, that's never going to be us. But I think within teaching, like you say, there is so much pressure externally and internally to do right by these students that, you know, we put on far too much on our shoulders. At the end of the day, you know, coming in from a secondary perspective, we don't sit the GCSEs, we don't sit the A levels, you know, and at the end of the day, we don't write the papers either, so we don't even get any influence in that final kind of judgment on teachers, which is, you know, what grades do they walk away with. And ultimately, I think for myself, especially in the early stages, having such a tunnel vision with regards to kind of my career, wanting to kind of progress, wanting to be the best teacher that I could be, I think there is a temptation to see kind of dating and relationships as another job on the to-do list. And I can only imagine for any kind of teachers out there who've got, you know, spouses, children, or dependents in any kind of capacity, having to juggle that life, that version of themselves, as well as their work, which it sounds quite ridiculous to say out loud, the idea of, you know, the sacrificial element, but because it is seen as a profession, particularly the idea of a noble profession, same thing with doctors or nurses or carers, the idea that you do it for others, and you kind of not sacrifice yourself fully, but the idea of giving up more than you would in a normal 9 to 5. It is something that you do have to shake yourself out of a little bit, which is not why I wasn't particularly looking to date somebody within teaching or outside of teaching, but I think it's been very healthy for me not to have dated a teacher, because I know, obviously, talking to you, your expectations and the idea of, you know, we've prioritized our relationship, you know, and reprioritize where my work fits into that. You know, there are some times when it's, you know, a parents' evening, look, I'm going to be coming back at 7:30, I'm going to be knackered, could you please, you know, sort out dinner or sort out, you know, a dark room for me to lie in for a bit. But I think ultimately those sorts of give and takes in the relationship then come more naturally of, you know, I have dialed back working at the weekends and gone, look, I will do, you know, 7:30 to 5. I will happily give that time up. But then if it's not done, unless it's urgent, it doesn't need to be done. Like, the to-do list has to stop somewhere, and we have to cut it off a lot shorter than probably I'd be normally comfortable with. But that's how you make these relationships work. You prioritize it, you make time for it. And, you know, we found that it's, you know, it's worth it. You know, it's Valentine's Day and we're still happy, you know, we're not at each other's throats.
Tomorrow, but it's actually a more important day today.
But you see what I mean? It's that, I think, give and take and compromising.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a sort of a thing in teaching where teaching is everything. Do you know what I mean? So teaching is your whole personality. And so, you know, if you'd have come into me on our first date and you wouldn't have shut up about teaching, I'd been like, not sure on this one.
Which would be fair, absolutely fair.
Because like I say, I'm completely outside of the teacher ball, so I don't understand any of this. And there's that aspect, and there's also the aspect where you're just like, do you really want to be with someone who's just going to talk about the job all the time?
Yeah.
Because it's not really that interesting. Do you know what I mean? Like the job itself is interesting, but speaking about jobs in general,
Yeah,
it's just not. It's not something I'm interested in. You know what I mean? I like talking about films, and we talk a lot about history. We have a lot of historical discussion. We talk about films, talk about games, we talk about all different parts of our personalities. And if you were to sort of, as a teacher, just like ignore all that, teach it, this is who I am. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to say it sort of would put off prospective partners, but like from my perspective, I would have been like, I'm not sure on this one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it can be very inaccessible, especially because I know we've joked when I've mentioned something, if there's like an acronym. So like when we've been talking, about, I've had like SEN training tonight, I'm going to be late. And then talking about, they were talking about these, new acronyms, these topics, this kind of idea within teaching. And it can be, and I think I forget myself, so inaccessible for anybody outside that bubble, in the same way that if you started talking to me about, I've been clearing rooms, sorting out drafts, and breaking down topics via, gigabyte, terabyte, things like that, and it goes straight over my head. And I have to remind myself that is me with teaching. If I'm talking about, my introduction, even for the show, I've probably used about, 6 or 7 technical terms that you probably might never have come across before, or, I've heard you mention that once or twice, no idea what it is. And I think, especially in the early stages, being more aware that teaching is a job, not a hobby. And as much as I love my job, I really do love making that difference in the world. It is ultimately not everything about me. I am something outside of Miss Edwards as a concept. And having that separation, I call it kind of the separation between church and state. You respect both, you can enjoy both to your heart's content, but they shouldn't really be mixing.
But do you have a laissez-faire approach?
Throwing all the historical terms out there now. But yeah, I think it's the idea of being more realistic about, this is a job and you can love your job, but at the same time, if you don't create room for yourself, teaching becomes your identity, and that can be a bit of a problem in and of itself, especially if you're trying to find somebody either within teaching or outside of teaching. I think if I was talking to another teacher and we were just talking about teaching on a date, which has happened in the past, it felt like more like we were in a staff room or a department meeting than it was actually getting to know the person. And you walk away going, that's nice, I got to have a cathartic moment about my teaching.
They're a good teacher, but I don't know anything about them.
Absolutely. And I think getting to know each other is obviously a core concept of relationships. Absolutely. So definitely something that I think we wouldn't have realised how compatible we were if teaching was the all-encompassing being in the room rather than just a part of me.
Yeah, because we're very much into the same sort of things. We like the same films. We play the same games. I'm putting us out to be really nerdy.
We are pretty nerdy, though. I think we need to just accept that.
We both like history. We're really into history. We're both into reading. All this sort of stuff that we've got in common. And then there's the big
elephant in the room.
That, like, I am a teacher. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I am Spartacus.
Yeah, it feels. Is it more like a confession of the only thing you'd say behind closed doors? You don't say it in public, kind of thing. But yeah.
But yeah, that would be a sort of big sort of not a line in the sand per se. But, it's just like one of those things that just like it's a part of who you are, but it's not everything.
Yes, and I think that's good generally for teachers, because I know we work incredibly hard as a profession. I know we're seeing teachers leave in droves year on year because the job is becoming more unsustainable. And I think not just within teaching, having this idea of, no, we're going to draw, like you say, draw a line in the sand. separate out who we are from what we do. And I think tone down teaching as this all-encompassing part of our identities. We also need to have that message reverberated both within schools themselves. So like leadership and head teachers, you have lives outside of this building, and we will respect that as much as possible. But also as well, within the community, we are human. We do not sleep under our desks. We do get great holidays, but at the same time, if you want to see what it's like, feel free to come into the classroom. We would love more people to understand what we do, so that I think there's a better understanding and appreciation, and that can then go both ways of, parents working with us, we're working with parents, we get the best outcomes for children, and everybody wins, I think, at the end of the day, with having that, knowledge is power approach.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I think I'm just going to throw out some things that like I would change about the profession.
Yep.
If as a sort of non-teacher.
Yeah.
So first of all, Mr. Prime Minister, I would introduce more flexibility. I don't know if that's a state thing or if that's an individual school thing or what. But yeah, give teachers a bit more flexibility. Like you mentioned earlier, just like allow them to have, say, like a week of floating days or whatever, where they can actually do stuff. Do you know what I mean? Because it just makes sense to me. Like if the request is submitted in a reasonable amount of time, then you've got a reasonable amount of time to find cover.
Yeah.
And it will give the individual such a boost to sort of have that flexibility. So like, I can actually do something with my kids on this Friday, or I can actually get married on a Friday, instead of having to wait till the weekend or whatever.
Attend my kids' show, or
that sort of thing. Another thing I would there's a sort of a stigma behind being a teacher in terms of it feels like you should always be looking to sort of move upwards into upper management, into SLT and that sort of thing. So that's what I picked up. But I don't think there should be a stigma, because like I've said many a time, that being a teacher is a wonderful profession, and it should be celebrated as such. And so there shouldn't be that sort of
that rush to get out of the classroom.
The pressure to just go in and like move up the ladder as far as. I think people should be just realise that it is a wonderful profession and it should be celebrated. So people should be like, yeah, let's get paid. Have a sort of progression in wages to just be classroom teachers. Do you know what I mean?
Not to throw another acronym at you, but that TLR to stay in the classroom, to hone your skills, and to have that old guard put in place, so that it's not the stigma of you're too expensive, or why aren't you in leadership if you're that good? Is there something wrong with you? There is actually hey, we recognise your experience. Like with any other profession, if you go into any other job, any interview, and you go, I've got 10 years of experience in this specific field, then obviously that would be something rewarded and celebrated and coveted, in essence, by many businesses. The idea that in teaching it seems to make you less desirable because the funding's just not there to reward that.
And you
is
mentioned
shocking.
that there's obviously the retention of teachers. Having some sort of movable pay scale that could do this, it would be surely a way to keep more teachers in the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously with 3 glowing ideas, I don't know if I could be kind of grinning more ear to ear that this has been very productive 18 months, I feel, so far to have.
She's coached me well for tonight.
But I think with that said, I know we've got lots of other kind of bullet points, prompts, questions that we had kind of written down for us to talk about. So we might have to make this into a bit of a 2-parter. Not to, put anyone on a cliffhanger here. I think we've covered the early stages at the very least. So I think ultimately, to leave off, obviously thank you to everybody who participated in that Twitter poll and kind of contributed to tonight's show. It's always really appreciated to have that level of engagement. And obviously, in terms of going forward, if you're curious to see obviously what I'll talk about next, hopefully having Andrew back maybe as a guest in a few weeks' time. If he's free, I'm free, we're all free. That would be great. And obviously keep an eye on my social medias as well to obviously find out what we're doing next. But with that being said, thank you ever so much for your time tonight. Thank you to my wonderful guest.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
And hopefully I will see you soon. Take care, everyone, and hope to chat to you again in the future.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.